Yeah, so welcome. This is Bringing Our Values to Work, and we just quickly wanted to introduce ourselves. I'm Kate Livingston. I am a museum consultant. I work primarily in evaluation, but also strategic planning and org development, and I hail from Detroit, Michigan. And some of the values I'm going to talk about today are curiosity, creativity, community, change, and growth. Over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sina. I run a company called Prime Access Consulting, and we do a lot of work with museums and folks in the GLAM sector around promoting and promulgating inclusive and universal design and digital accessibility so that we can reach the widest possible audience with the amazing things that we make in this sector. I live in North Carolina in Research Triangle Park, Cary, for those of you who know the area. And the values I'll be talking about today are optimism, innovation, equity, and delight.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Mimosa Shah, and I'm Adult Program Coordinator at Skokie Public Library, which is a library that is located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. I help manage, develop, evaluate public programs for adults, and the values I will be talking about today include community, justice, creativity, integrity, and transformation.
My name is Nikhil Trivedi. I work at a museum in Chicago. I'm a web architect there. The values that I'll be talking about today are also justice, openness, honesty, and joy.
Fantastic. Okay, so we thought that even though some of us, like clearly the four of us on this panel, have been thinking a lot about values lately, it's not necessarily something that all of us do all the time, and that you might not even be 100% clear about what we mean in this session title when we're talking about our values and what it means to bring them to work. So we wanted to start us off making sure that we're all on the same page, and also to provide some, I think, really much needed space, because it's very rare that we have the time to slow down and think intentionally about our values. So I'm going to walk us through an activity. Those of you that are sitting at tables, you'll have some small pieces of paper and some value statements on larger pieces of paper. I'm also going to put up a website in just a second, and I'll read it out loud, that has all these same materials. But we're going to walk through this activity together so that you can define your personal values. You can spend some time thinking about what those are and figure out why they're important to you. So a good way to start thinking about this is to think back to times in our lives where our values sort of came into play. So that's what we're going to do. Before I do that, I wanted to do a little reminder that the sessions are being recorded. And just to say that, you might want to use discretion in terms of using your museum's name or a person's name. It's totally up to you. You can certainly do so if you wish, but I just wanted to make that reminder as we're talking about values. I think it's important to be transparent about that and just remind you that you might want to make a mindful choice when you do that. So let me bring up the activity here. Okay, here is the website I was talking about for those of you who either would prefer to follow along online or would want to come back to this later. All the resources that we are going to be talking about and using during this session are all at this short link, which is bit.do, so bit.do/MCN 2017 values. So bit.do/MCN 2017 values. So that's something to not only use now if it's helpful to you, but also just know that everything, if you like this activity, if you like what we're talking about, this is the place to get all of those resources. And we'll be adding to that after the session as well. Another thing that's on there are some visual descriptions of the slides that we'll be showing. So those are all located in that folder. It takes you to a Google folder. Okay, so the thing I want you to do first is just like for yourself in your own head, I want you to think about some times when you were super happy. So if you can, try to bring in moments from your work life and your personal life. Think about those ridiculous, can't wipe it off your face smiles where you just like are grinning, you are happy. What were you doing? Think about the people that were with you when you were feeling that happy, and think about the factors that contributed to that happiness. So just think on that for a minute and kind of hold that with you. All right, now I want you to think about times when you were super proud. Again, both work and personal life. Things that you were just like beaming with pride, you wanted to tell people, you were excited to share it with the world. And again, think about if there were people that were there sharing in that pride with you, people you wanted to talk about. Who were those people, and what were the factors that contributed to you feeling that sense of pride? All right, the third one is to think about and identify times when you felt really fulfilled and satisfied. So again, think about work and think about home, think about personal examples. What need or desire were you feeling, or what was fulfilled for you? And how and why did those experiences give your life meaning? So think about, again, that's the happy times, it's the times of pride, and the times when you feel really fulfilled and satisfied. So with that, the next step that we're going to do, and again, this will be on your own, is to either online, where they're in a Google Doc shared at that link, or the pieces of paper in front of you that have a value list. I want each of you to make sure that you either have that list in front of you or have it close enough to you. And what I want you to do is take this list of common values, and it'll get you started. You might not love all the values on this list. You might find some that resonate quickly, but I want you to spend about 3 to 4 minutes and just try to find 5 or 10 that really resonate with you. You can write them down, you can type them somewhere, anywhere that's convenient for you. You don't have to use the little sheets of paper yet. Right now, just try to find 5 or 10 where you're like, yes, I like that one. And again, if your value isn't on that list, that's okay. You can come up with your own, add your own. And as you work through it, you might find that some things naturally combine. So for example, if you value philanthropy, community, generosity, those might be sort of bundled to be service to others or something like that. So I will stop talking and give you a few minutes on your own to go through those values. Feel free to cross some out that totally do not feel good to you too, because that's quite empowering. And it's okay if you're not there yet, but for those of you who are, the next thing I want you to do, and arguably this is the hardest thing, bless you, the next thing I want you to do is try to find, out of those that you really like, those that resonate, try to come up with 3 to 5 that are your top values. If you had to narrow it down, if you had to even rank in order of priority, your number 1 value and your next 2, 3, 4, 5, which ones would you choose?
And if you're having a hard time narrowing them down, you can think about what your values are today in this room, and what you're sort of feeling in this moment right now.
Absolutely. One of the things we discussed in our panel is that our values change, and that's okay. So yeah, what are you feeling in this room today? And also, as you're prioritizing, sometimes it helps to imagine a situation where you had to make a choice between your top 2 or 3, right? So if you value like service and stability, imagine a situation where maybe you were going to decide that you were going to pack up your stuff and move to another country to do some really important service work and critical foreign aid work, or that you were going to stay home and do the same sort of work with a local organization or donate money. So you can kind of compare situations where you might decide which one rises to the top of your list. So just spend a couple more minutes on that. I'm putting the website back up too. It's bit.do/MCN 2017 values if you need it. All right, how are we feeling? You got a few? You at least got a few. Okay, fantastic. Sounds like you do. So the next thing I'm going to have you do is pair and share, but don't do it yet, because I have a few things I want to make sure that we do to explain the framework. And also, we might come down and do it with you, because we've been working on our values. We're super curious to hear about yours. But what we want you to do is find someone to sit with and share to your comfort level at least one of your values, and more time, if time allows, more if you're comfortable. Some conversation starters that we thought we'd share that might help with this conversation is to ask your partner, was the activity confirming? Like, did you feel, yeah, these are my values? Or was it surprising? Did it surprise you to think, yeah, that's something I really value? Or was it a little bit of both? Another question you might want to talk about is, can people guess your values? Do you kind of wear them on your sleeve? Do people know when you walk in the room, like, yep, those are their values? I could guess it a mile away. So that's another conversation you might have. A third is, how do you turn those values into action? So if you value, for example, justice, what does that look like in your life? How do you turn that into action? And then we want to bring it back to our museum context and think about things like, do your values show up more at work or more when you're at home? And then finally, do you feel comfortable living those values at work? So go ahead and find someone. We might come down and find you as well. And you're going to spend about 6 minutes on this. Make sure you both get a turn. I'll tell you when you're about halfway through that time, so you make sure you get a chance to talk. Okay, let's start wrapping it up. And what I would like you to do next, I'm glad you love talking about your values. Okay, what I would love for you to do as a next step is take one of the small pieces of paper on your table, and if you're comfortable with it, we would love for you to write down 3 to 5 of those top values. You don't need to include your name. You don't need any identifying information. We want this to be anonymous. We have a really wonderful volunteer, Mark. Hi, Mark. Mark is going to come around with this beautiful silver ice bucket and collect your values, church style. So you can pass them around to maybe one person, or Mark will come around and grab those. So take a minute to do that, ideally with sort of clear handwriting. And I am going to give you a second to wrap that up, and then we're going to transition into hearing from our panel of speakers, and we're going to start with Sina. So Sina, I'm going to pull your slides up, but you are welcome to start whenever you're ready.
So hi, everybody. I mentioned 4 values during the intros: equity, optimism, innovation, and delight. And so I'd like to go over those a little bit and say what I think about them. Oh, one last thing. You have a timer going?
I sure do.
Excellent. Essentially, with respect to equity, a lot of what I focus on is trying to make interfaces and helping people to make interfaces accessible to everybody, not just somebody with a disability, but somebody who may not be able to interact with it for a variety of reasons. And so the core belief here for me is that everything can be made somewhat accessible or inclusively designed. I'm working on projects with folks that are, trying to enable like blind teenagers to do 3D terrain generation for video games. So, it's a little frustrating to go sometimes from that to it would be really hard to write some alt text for an image on a website, right? There's a little bit of a disparate thing there. And so, but this is just this core belief that anything can be made, accessible or inclusively designed, and that there are wins when you do that. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Speaking of those wins, you should cherish them, those early wins, no matter how small. Talk about them with your friends, tweet about them. They're important. You're doing good work that's impacting visitors for the better. You should take pride in that. It doesn't matter how small that improvement is. Design with empathy, right? I think this one is pretty self-explanatory, but the idea is that our interfaces make people feel things and evoke emotions in our visitors, and we should cherish that responsibility and take it seriously with respect to reaching everybody. And lastly, it's the right thing to do, right? And I think we can all agree on that. With respect to optimism, things can always get better, right? So I'm like first generation. My parents were, like all about school and everything. And so, it was like, hey, I got a 98 on the test. And it was like, that's a great job. How can we make this better? I was like, it's a 98, And so that's, I have unfortunately or fortunately internalized that. So it doesn't matter how small or how little or how bad things are at the beginning, everything can get better. And it doesn't matter how amazing they are, I still believe that they can get better. So set the bar high. 2 implications of this, right? The first is it's never too late to start. And the second is, as I said, no matter how things are, they can always be improved. So just kind of striving for excellence. And lastly, I believe fundamentally that people want to do the right thing, but sometimes they're scared of the unknown and they don't know how to do it. That shouldn't be replaced with they don't want to do it. And I spend a lot of my time trying to tease that out of teams and organizations. With respect to innovation, this shouldn't be a chore, right? It can be fun. This can be really delightful stuff. Accessibility and inclusive design force us to think of the underlying structure and semantics of what we're trying to do. So it forces you to actually think for a second, wait, I know the picture looks pretty, or I know the video is amazing, or the audio is great for somebody who can hear, but what am I really trying to convey here? And it forces you to think about that when you're transforming it into different modalities, into different ways of interacting with stuff. It's a different way of designing, right? So the designers, I sometimes tell designers, look, it's not like we're saying don't do certain things. You can do anything you like. I'm just restricting the medium a little bit. So instead of glass, I'm making you work in clay, right? But you can still do a lot of amazing things in clay, and it forces you to kind of change the way you think about design a little bit. And oftentimes we end up, as a result of this, designing things that are critical for one audience, but they're impactful for everybody, right? And this is that whole universal design concept. It might be absolutely critical if you can't see, but it's definitely helpful if you can. And frankly, it's a different way of looking at things too. So there's a side effect of increasing awareness of our fellow human beings and how we interact with museums and the world around us. With respect to delight, the last one, we shouldn't just make things accessible, but we should allow them to evoke, delight, to really convey the gestalt of the experience. So I'm a really big believer in this, that I want to inspire delight and joy, not just okay, we've done the bare minimum. And to be quite honest with you guys, almost 80 to 90% of my clients were corporations and law firms and things like that. The reason that it's now 80 to 90% museums is because museum people are way cooler to deal with. They're just awesome. They're my friends. They're my drinking buddies. They're my dinner companions. And they want to do this right thing and to inspire this sense of delight. And that's what I take joy from. And lastly, I want to allow others to invoke delight in their visitors, right? It's not just something that I'm doing. I get a lot of joy from allowing others to think about different audiences and say, I want to help them build it in a way that they can, that they feel enabled and empowered to evoke delight in people. And the last point I'll make here is that the metric I use for measuring this is that if we have a shared experience amongst different, visitors with different abilities, the way that I measure whether or not I've done a good job or we've done a good job in terms of inclusive design is that if there's a wow moment or if there's a really sad moment or an impact, that should be simultaneously felt by everybody in the audience, not 2 minutes later after the description is done. And so that kind of keeps us honest in terms of the real-time nature of some of these interfaces, but also just in terms of making sure that we're conveying the right things. Thanks.
Fantastic. I will pull your slides up, Mimosa. Can we say thank you to Sina?
That's still there. Yes, so I work at a public library, and we have a very different model in that, and I shouldn't say that different. There's so much overlap between museums and libraries, but we are a free space, entirely free, and we try to welcome everybody. And in fact, that feeds into a lot of my first value that I'll talk about today, which is community. Of course, because we're a public institution and we serve residents, we often wonder, where does that leave us in terms of experimentation? So I came to work with the presumption that the self I presented would always be different from the self I inhabited at home or amongst peers. And this divided self, this sense of somebody who is one thing at home and one thing at work, is really a treacherous thing to do. Learning to be vulnerable and open happened over time, and I value community because that is why I'm drawn to this work. I find myself wanting to create spaces where people can convene and connect and learn from one another. And so what does it truly mean beyond that? So every year we have an event at our library, and we inspire people to stand against racism. And it's sponsored by the YWCA, but we also have people stand out on the street. But one of the things that we don't think about as often is, what does it truly mean to stand out against racism? Is this just lip service? As an institution, how can we bring in people who have distinct perspectives and viewpoints and can actually speak to what they mean by being just and open with honesty and integrity? So this is a photo from one of our pop-up programs, the Civic Lab, and what we asked people to really respond to is, what does it mean? You went outside and you stood against racism, but what are you going to do about it? What does that conversation look like to you? So I also value justice, and this is a picture of Jean Mishima, a member of the Chicago Japanese American Historical Society. She's showing patrons the ID tag and other symbols of confinement during her incarceration with other Japanese Americans in 1942. And through the public programming, I aspire to help patrons contemplate what justice for our past histories might look like, what history is told in multivalent tones might sound like. And I often ask myself, how can we dismantle familiar modes of thought and be inspired to act against tired narratives? I value creativity and experimentation. So this image, it was taken at one of our Capture Skokie photo walks, not this one. Sorry, it's on the drive, my photos, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So, yeah, sorry for the disconnect between the photos and my words here. But what I want to say is that we also try to help patrons learn in informal settings, just like a lot of museums do in incorporating these spaces and moment-by-moment opportunities. And in this particular photo right here, we have together at the table, so we bring people out to have really casual drop-in conversations with conversation starters at each table, and it's an effort to practice reflective listening and get to know your neighbors. So I value creativity and experimentation, and I really believe in giving people the tools to be confident in their own exploration, honoring their ability and determination to learn and create in various ways. But to be creative requires contemplation. And how can we cultivate creativity? Sorry.
Just tell me which one. And I'll pull it.
Yeah, so this is, so we invited Beck Tench, who is a former museum educator and a graduate student at the University of Washington. And she has helped us with defining and thinking about creating contemplative spaces for staff and for other, for patrons as well. And one of the things we talked about is how can we cultivate creativity fueled by reflective thoughts, conversation, and actions informed by them when our work does not often permit us to be creative in that way or contemplative in that way. We have everyone from shelvers to people working at customer service to people who are working in our maintenance staff, and they're not given the opportunity to be contemplative and to really reflect on and think about what else we do as an organization, because that's not the time that is set aside for them when they're at the organization. So our administration loved hosting Beck. But there were some colleagues who recoiled at the thought of being contemplative in a space that doesn't systematically encourage it for everyone. And I wondered to myself, how could we prevent burnout and or resentment among staff who didn't respond to this project? And more importantly, how could I honor my own value of integrity when colleagues potentially viewed this as a vanity project? How could we make this translatable and carry it forward? So one of my inspiring people that I know, and she's not here, she's a community organizer in Logan Square. Her name is Juliet de Jesus Alejandre. And she's inspired my thinking on integrity a lot. And she writes that healing is about reconnection. And why do I mention healing? I think all of us have a lot of trauma, whether we recognize it or not. You can keep going. So if you go past this. So, sorry.
No, you're good. Keep going, please.
So again, whether we are conscious or not, we all experience trauma. So I often wonder, how can we hold that pain, make it tangible, and be willing to dare? How can we honor others' truths while reckoning with our complicity? Public libraries are changing rapidly, and our society is losing a lot of vital third spaces where people can convene for free and exchange ideas. And I often think to myself, how do we create places for people to connect self with self, self with community, self with land and spirit? Because ourselves are incredibly divided, and that way, of course, leads back to madness. So how can we create more spaces where we can attend to and support the release of trauma and ultimately reconnect? And of course, last but not least, about transformation, librarians are information gatherers. We are story sharers. We're informal educators who inspire curiosity. Yet sometimes our industry is less perceptive of its traditional roles and can't make the shift needed. And I believe in change in my industry. It is sometimes really slow to catch up. So with that said, I want to say thank you for letting me share my values, and I would be happy to talk with any of you some more about my work.
That was my bad on Mimosa's slides there. They were out of control, moving at their own pace. I apologize for that, but I think we got to most of them. Okay, mine are supposed to move on their own, so don't be alarmed. So as a young person, I think I was pretty tuned into my values. I was that teenager who started an Amnesty International chapter in my high school. I was that teenager with a Volvo station wagon covered in bumper stickers, including a Malcolm X quote and a rainbow flag. I was that teenager. And after finishing college and grad school, I worked in restorative justice programs, a rape crisis center, and with kids who were removed from their homes due to abuse and neglect. And then things changed. When I was 27, a then 7-year-old, who is now a 20-year-old, came into my life, Danny. I met him through my work, and not long after I adopted him. For more than 10 years now, Danny has been my super stubborn, wickedly smart, pain-in-the-ass, beautiful son, finding his way in the world. He's strong-willed and hard on himself, and he makes bad puns, and he always roots for the underdog. He's a whole lot like me, and he's my whole heart. So when I adopted Danny, I decided I couldn't, or at least shouldn't, work in the social work sector anymore. I didn't think I could do that all day and then come home and still be a good mom. Or at least I was worried I might not be able to. So enter museums. I managed visitor research and evaluation for 7 years at a museum in my hometown of Denver, Colorado. The job was really good. It was maybe even great, and I was able to take all these cool creative risks and to carve out a department that was doing really important work in our field, and I fell in love with this work, and I fell in love with museum work. Looking back, though, I definitely compromised during that chapter of my life. I would be that person talking in hushed tones with my coworkers about the problems we saw, be those institutional racism or sexism or a host of other issues. But I'd rarely speak truth to power. When I did, it was pretty carefully, and way too quickly I backed down when I was challenged. I'm not proud of that. I fell into some pretty serious patterns of power and privilege. It was really easy and it was really gross. I accomplished a ton during those years, but my values took second place to our institutional culture. I promise I'll talk about the Daily Show later. To be clear, I'm not blaming my former institution. I'm owning how seductive complacency can be, how optional and how possible it was for me, especially as a cis white woman, to choose how engaged I wanted to be in my values. Most important, though, for today is the story of how I found my way back to my values and how they're now an essential part of everything I do. When I started consulting, I decided it was important to be upfront about who I am and what I value, because it's a differentiator, right? Something that sets me apart from other museum consultants. What I didn't realize until I did it was how incredibly empowering and critical it was for me to reconnect with that part of me that I'd let be dormant for longer than I realized. People said I might miss out on potential clients, that I was leading with my politics. Ultimately, I kept going, taking big, sloppy, unapologetic leaps right into my values, because I felt most fully alive and fully myself when I did it. And I'm guessing I have lost potential clients, but not the ones I want to work with. In fact, my clients often tell me they want to work with me because of my values and because our values align. Now I use my values as a filter to decide which museums I want to work with and which projects I want to take on. So I want to end with talking to you about how some of the anti-oppression and anti-racism work I do outside of my job has been a major influence on my museum work. Specifically, I want to talk to you about Safety Pin Box. Safety Pin Box was started by two phenomenal Black women, Marissa Janae Johnson and Leslie Mack. It was born out of a response to the abundance of white liberal surprise and sadness that followed the Trump election. Marissa and Leslie had this idea that rather than simply wearing a safety pin to show quote-unquote allyship or solidarity, white folks needed to do something concrete and measurable and real if they wanted to be part of dismantling racism and ending white supremacy. So their idea was to start a monthly subscription box. Sounds strange, I know, but it's packed with resources, activities, and challenges for white folks, but also for non-Black people of color to work on. Importantly, a large proportion of the proceeds from that subscription box go directly into the hands of Black women and femmes doing challenging and often thankless work in organizing and activism. Safety Pin Box has, no joke, totally changed my life. I thought I was doing pretty good work as a white anti-racist before, but I was kidding myself. And the fact that Leslie and Marissa gave a portion of their income automatically into this fund to support Black women activists was really inspiring to me. It led me to start my own fund called Fund the Change. So now a portion of all of my income goes directly into a fund to support museum, arts, and cultural workers who are activists and change makers in our field, often marginalized and too infrequently compensated for their work and their ideas. In fact, Nikhil's the most recent gift recipient, so that's pretty cool. And there's some others in the room, I think, too. Priority is always given to people of color, Native and Indigenous people, LGBTIQ+ folks, people with disabilities, and those with financial disadvantages, as well as women. So I'll tweet out the link, and I have little cards with the information that I can give you after the session. I'd love for you to recommend future recipients. So finally, I'll talk about the elephant in the room, in my case, The Daily Show. For me, I'm a big introvert, and Safety Pin Box recently was featured on a segment in The Daily Show. Marissa reached out to me and asked me if I would be part of it too. They wanted a subscriber, essentially, to make fun of. So you're welcome to Google The Daily Show and Safety Pin Box, check it out for yourself, laugh at me. But the reason I end with it today is because it's a really good example of the kinds of risks and rewards that living my values bring to my life. And for that, I have absolutely zero regrets. In fact, several clients have told me they've seen the show and they still want to work with me, so there's that. So thanks for listening to my story, and please come find me later if you want to talk about Safety Pin Box or Fund the Change. Thanks.
There's no order to my slides either, so don't be surprised. Or you can be surprised. That's totally fine. So there's nothing that I do in my life that's not deeply connected with the people that I'm close to. Rooting myself in my communities and loving my peers generously and abundantly has led me to a personal commitment that I've made to myself and to the world to end all forms of violence in all the communities I'm a part of. And violence to me can look like a lot of different things. And it sits on a spectrum that includes jokes and salty remarks, to emotional isolation, to refusing to say someone's name properly, to not paying workers a living wage, to police violence and rape culture. And from this commitment, from this perspective, I want to talk about three particular values that I bring into my work, and that's justice, openness, and joy. Regarding justice, in her book, Feminism is for Everybody, Bell Hooks writes, when we accept that true love is rooted in recognition and acceptance, that love combines acknowledgement, care, responsibility, commitment, and knowledge, we understand there can be no love without justice. So bringing justice into my work for me looks like a lot of different things. Aaliyah Brown this morning called out listening and lifting up voices of marginalized people. Creating space to connect, like Kate just talked about, for me is something that I prioritize in my work every day, from always being available for coffee or for connecting with people one-on-one and making it clear to my colleagues that I'm always available, to doing emotional check-ins before meetings. If I take a sort of a check of the room and it seems clear that people aren't quite ready to get into work, that people are bringing a lot of feelings into the room, just doing a quick go around saying, how are you feeling at this moment, and creating space for that. Lifting up voices of marginalized people is a big part of what we do with the Visitors of Color Project, which you can see at visitorsofcolor.tumblr.com. Giving credit to people who have said things before me, because a lot of what I'm sharing isn't new or isn't unique, and recognizing that and giving credit for folks who have said things before me, and amplifying the voices of people who are in the same room as me who just said something, because often as a man, me saying it will be heard much more than someone else. So using a tool that women in the Obama administration used to amplify each other's voices is a way that I lift up other people's voices as a way to bring justice to my work. And listening and lifting up voices is connected with this, is connected with my commitment to end all violence, because silencing is a form of violence. The second value I want to talk about is openness, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I do at my museum. And I think about openness in the regard of the work that I do as a web architect, with regards to open code and open data. So we're in the middle of a pretty huge website presence redesign right now. We're working with a partner to do all the design and development, but in-house, me and my team are tasked with giving our partners everything they need to do their jobs well. So we're taking data from about 7 different disparate systems that all kind of function separately from each other, that are all pretty siloed, which isn't a unique setup, right? A lot of people here probably recognize that sort of architecture. So we're taking data from about 7 of these different systems, pulling them into one place and putting an API on top of it, so our partner only has one place that they need to go to, unifying the way that all that data is served. So if they know how to talk to our collections, they already know how to talk to our shop, and they already know how to get our events and everything like that. And the API that we're putting on top of it to make available to our partners, it's great that it'll be available to our partners, but something that I'm advocating for is for it to be available to anyone in the world who wants to tinker with our data, because the effort to make it available publicly versus just for our partners is really little, and the gain is huge. So making all of our public data easily accessible and usable is connected with my commitment, because limiting access to information and resources is also a form of violence. So with regards to open code, all the projects that I'm spearheading in my department, we're building in open source right from the start of the project. It's kind of a vulnerable place for me as a developer to be in, where people can sort of look in my code from the first word and variable that I type. But you know, I feel like it's connected with openness leads to vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to trust, and trust leads to authority, which from what I hear is something museums are kind of into nowadays. Real quick, the last value that I want to talk to, I know I'm close to hitting the time, is joy. And there's a lot of things I do in my everyday work to bring joy into workplaces that aren't typically seen as places where you can have hearty laughs or play games or be silly, right? So we did this thing at my work that we've done for a few years. I've got a guitar at my desk, and once a week, we'll get together in an auditorium or in a garden if the weather's nice enough, pass around the guitar, and we'll each sing one song. Tina's here. She's part of that group. But it's brought people together from across the museum, you know, people who don't have working relationships with each other, but we do this thing once a week where we play guitar. People are welcome who don't play guitar. We'll just sort of pick a song, and if someone can figure out how to play it, we'll play and sing it. We've got a colleague who brings shakers whenever she shows up, so it's a real participatory kind of thing. And it's not something that I'm tasked with doing at work, right? It's something that I just started doing with the people who sat immediately around me and has sort of grown over the span of a number of years. The bell that Rachel used in her Ignite talk last night is actually a bell that sits in my workplace, and we ring this big glorious bell whenever we move a Post-it note from the doing column to done. And it's like a small way to just sort of note a small accomplishment with something joyful. So I'll leave you with a quick quote for folks who might feel like, how can I do some of the things that I feel passionate about in my workplace? And it's something Liz Neely said here at MCN in 2013. And she said, getting into a little trouble is important. It's about trying, which again, Aaliyah and Adrian talked about this morning as well. If you're not getting into a little trouble, you're probably not doing it right. So thanks.
Mimosa, I'll bring up the cloud. Hopefully it'll work.
All right, so we've had some really great time to reflect upon our values, and we are also now about to bring up a word cloud of our shared values.
It's gonna work.
It'll work. But in the meantime, maybe we can reflect a little bit on the conversations we had earlier in the session too, like what were the more common things that brought out? Oh, and we got the word cloud.
Yes.
So what are the things that you notice on here? What are the more prominent values? Curiosity, inclusion, creativity,
Fun.
yes, yes, quality, creativity, fun. I mean, that we share a lot. And what are some of the things that are not there? And thinking about that too is as important as well. Like, and is there any type of schism that exists between where we are in our personal lives versus our professional lives? And do they marry each other? Do they go their separate ways? Some things I consider for sure.
All right, Nikhil, I'll bring up the other one.
What we're about to bring up now is a word cloud of the core values from 12 museums, taken from their mission statements and things like that. So word cloud looks a little different from the one we just saw that we all sort of created in this room right now. What sticks out to you here? Excellence.
Excellence.
What was that? Creativity. Community. Integrity. Do these values match your personal values? Say yes, raise a hand if they do. Yeah, people are kind of wishy-washy. Yeah. Do these values match the collective values of the people in the room? They're not bad values. Yeah.
That's about right.
But you're kind of wishy-washy about that too, right? So there's a clear disconnect between the stated values of our mission, of our institutions, taken more broadly from just the 12 that we pulled this word cloud from, and the stated values of those folks in the room. So do folks feel like this word cloud could be your institution's word cloud? I'm seeing rigorous head nods. Yeah, okay, cool. So I'll pass it off to Sina.
All right, Sina.
So just thinking about one of those last things that Nikhil just said, right, in terms of matching values against your institutions, and I'll start us off with maybe one example, but I'd love to hear from you guys in places that you would go to in your current job to find out what your institution's values are. So one I'll lead us off with is, for example, the mission statement of the museum. But what are some other ones that you guys can think of that would be places to go to find out what the values of your institution are?
Budget. Yeah, just spell it out.
Like that one. Proposals? Exhibition schedule? Collections page on the website?
Wow,
The collection itself, yeah. Who sits on the board? The employee handbook, okay. Programming over to my left, your right, and acquisition meetings, is that correct? Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a more comprehensive list than the
Seriously?
one we came up with. That was good. That was really good.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely. So we wanted to sort of end, we structured this session so that you had a lot more time in the middle and earlier to talk to each other, but we do want to at least have a couple minutes for questions. So before I open it up for a couple of questions, we want to end with thinking about what it's going to take to bridge that value gap. How do we close those two or superimpose those word clouds on top of each other, or should we, or whose values take precedent, and how do we know? So we know this is just the start of a conversation of how we're bringing our values into our work. One of the things we wanted to leave you with, I have some copies, paper copies, if you're into that sort of thing, up here. It's MCN. Up here, if you're interested in values and you want to do some more work, there's a worksheet that'll help you with a personal values statement and just dig in a little bit more into some of the ideas we talked about today. It's also available at that website that I had put up earlier, so you can download it and do it that way as well. I'll put the website up again in just a minute because I can't remember it, and then I'll read it aloud when I put it up. But we wanted to give this to you as sort of a call to action and how to take that next step. I know sometimes it's hard when you get home from a conference to know what now, what next. So we leave you with that, and then please, we would love to hear from you how you're bringing your values to work or any questions you have for us.
Community and then not offer like a free or discounted admission. So it's like, how are you actually honoring community if you're not giving people who can't pay?
I'm interested in museums that make that explicit. You know, that instead of saying we value these things generally.
We also at public libraries encounter similar hurdles in that we say we value community and we're a third space and we honor people to come in, and yet at the same time we have library fines, which we want to get rid of, at least my fellow colleagues and I, but that has not passed the board yet. We also have scenarios in which people who have library cards from the city of Chicago can't necessarily check out items at our library, which is just north of the city, because of another board rule. So how are we being inclusive if we can't welcome anybody and everybody to check out materials? I mean, they could use the space, they can use materials while they're in the space, but what is so wrong about letting them check out materials from our collection? So we have similar hurdles, and living out your values and living out that culture is another session altogether. I think it's great that we have culture, but what does it mean? Yeah, you had a question.
And I have to stop us for a second because we are out of time, and I want to be respectful of our next session that's in this room. I don't want to stop the conversation either, though, so will you please come and find us? And don't hesitate to tweet at us. You probably saw we had them on repeat, so hopefully you know how to track us down. I think we're all going to be around the rest of today and tonight. Is that, yeah? And so please, I apologize for cutting us short. I hate doing it. No, not your fault at all. We love this conversation. Coven, I do have one, a museum that lives their values. I'll tell you later. It's the Denver Botanic Gardens. A gardens.
And thank you guys for coming to this and being passionate about it and hanging out with us for an hour.
Totally. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.